Hi and welcome to episode 5 of the InCites podcast with UNSW Law Society. Today we'll be chatting with Mark Currell from Clifford Chance in the Sydney office here at 1 O'Connell Street. Come with me as we have a look around the office. This is the lobby of the office, and all the black dots here are all the offices that Clifford Chance reside in, and this is us down here. This is the main lobby, which is where most of the clients will come if they're waiting for a meeting or to have a chat with one of the lawyers here at Clifford Chance. This is the Bondi meeting room, which is the largest meeting room here in Clifford Chance. Also has an incredible view of the Sydney Harbour and is where most of the partners have their regular meetings. You are listening to InCites, produced by the University of New South Wales Law Society, a podcast dedicated to bring you an insight into law school, the legal profession, and legal issues. The production team would also like to show our respects and acknowledge the Bedegal people, who are the traditional custodians of the land, of elders past and present on which this podcast is made. Thank you to Clifford Chance for sponsoring this episode. Clifford Chance currently offers a winter clerkship program which allows clerks to experience a busy and exciting time at the office. To accommodate for the UNSW trimester program, they have created a special 2-week program, which in 2021 runs from Monday 30th of August to Friday 10th of September. Over the course of this clerkship, clerks will experience life at Clifford Chance through 2 different teams of real-life matters and communicating with a variety of departments across the firm. Clerks will automatically be considered for a position within their 2023 graduate program, and applications close on the 14th of May. For our 5th episode here on the podcast, we have invited Mark Currell from Clifford Chance. He is currently a corporate practitioner with extensive expertise in private equity and M&A. His major areas of focus include advising private market firms and multinational businesses. Notably, Mark has advised Macquarie Capital in connection with its acquisition of a 50% stake in environmental monitoring solutions. A huge welcome and thank you to Mark for joining us today.
Thank you, Harry.
Just as a bit of an icebreaker, I just wanted to ask you, if you were any type of coffee, what would you be?
Oh, that's an interesting one. I would probably, I'd be a flat white, probably a mix of the strong coffee and the mellow milk. I don't know, a blend.
A bit of a multi-faceted individual, would you say?
I'm not sure I'm particularly complex, but I'd like to think I'm not also just...
either milk or coffee.
Milk or coffee, indeed.
Outside of being a lawyer, what do you do in your spare time?
I like to get outdoors primarily. I've also got a family, so I spend quite a bit of time with them. But if I'm not at work and I'm not with my family, I like surfing, running, swimming, anything really just being outdoors.
How do you manage all of that sport, and especially with a really busy desk job?
Yeah, I think it's everybody lives busy lives these days. It's about planning and putting time around to your time for work and the time for your family, and then a little bit of time for yourself as well. Obviously, the jobs we have is you can't necessarily predict when the job will need you, and so, but we live and we have flexible working now, and you just need to make sure you do maintain space to invest with your family and your friends, and quite importantly, spend time also doing what you want for yourself as well, because if you don't do that, that can have an adverse impact on your professional career.
Taking time for yourself is a really important thing.
It is, and I think both organisations and individuals in organisations have got better at that and have actually learnt that, and COVID is, in some respects, and our experience in COVID has accelerated that learning, and there's much more comfort now with flexible working. There's much more comfort that people will take responsibility for their jobs and do their jobs just as well, whether they're in the office or remote. And the reality is, from a professional business perspective now, it's we have both people in the office, we have people at home, and most people mix between the two. And that does make it easier, I think, to get that balance in terms of investing time in your job, in your family, friends, and yourself.
So something about you probably is very noticeable is the accent. Mm-hmm. I just wanted to ask, do you mind telling us a bit about where you come from and also how you ended up working for Clifford Chance in Sydney?
Sure. I was born and grew up in rural England, about 2 hours north of London, in a country area. I went to university in England, but I always had a desire to travel and see the world. And one of the reasons I chose law was because it was a career that really would allow me to travel the world. And in the first 10 years of my career, that's largely what I did. I worked, started in London, I worked in Germany, in Frankfurt, and I came and worked in Australia. And then I had a series of jobs which took me all over the world. I returned, sorry, let me say that again. I had a series of jobs that took me all over the world, where I left big law and worked in-house for a couple of big corporates. And that allowed me to really fulfill that ambition of travelling the world. I came back to Australia in 2009 and settled back into big law firms and have been here since then.
So you've worked in multiple jurisdictions. Was there any barriers in terms of working outside your home jurisdiction, I guess?
No, again, in some ways that's the beauty of law, in that if you're qualified in England or Australia or Hong Kong, any common law jurisdiction, it's very easy to go to another common law jurisdiction and in some ways hit the ground running, because there's a great commonality of the law and practice, and then get the local qualification. And so, and that's a well-trodden path. I've also worked in civil law jurisdictions. I've done a lot in Portugal and Italy and France, for example, where it's not, obviously it's very different. There's a language differential, there's a significant legal differential, but the reality is English law is a major export product. So even if you work in those jurisdictions and you're qualified in English law, then very often there is work that's relevant to what you do. And that's why you see a lot of Australian lawyers, for example, can go to New York, they can go to London, they can go to Hong Kong very easily. Here at Clifford Chance, though, we send people very often we had a lot of people go to Paris. We're having somebody about to go to Italy. It is possible to move with a common law type qualification and still go and work in a civil law jurisdiction.
What made you decide to settle in Australia out of all countries?
I just felt very comfortable here. It allowed me, I think, in essence, it allowed me to combine doing my job, which I've always quite enjoyed, with that outdoor life. Britain and England is a great place, but the weather isn't particularly conducive to outdoor life. The other great thing of doing law in Sydney is you can do this job without having a particularly long commute. Whereas in London, the commute can be very significant. And for me, I've realised very early on that wasn't something I could do for a 10, 20, 30-year period. So Australia and Sydney in particular offered me the balance in my life of being allowed to do my job at the top of my career with leading firms, but also have that balance in my life as well.
I would like to politely disagree with the fact that Sydney still has incredibly bad commute times. It took me, I think, an hour and a half to get to Sydney this morning. Mm-hmm. What actually made you decide to study law in the end, other than the fact of traveling and being able to travel around?
I think like many people, I fell into it in that I had good grades at school, and then you therefore look at what your grades can take you into in terms of tertiary education. And in my case, I wasn't cut out to be for medicine. That wasn't for me. And I was looking at law or economics, and I got a bit of guidance. And off that guidance, I chose to do law. And it really does, it sets you down a path. It's one of those moments in life that's a real junction point. I then studied law at a university in England. I quite enjoyed it. The study of law is very different. When I did my degree, it was very different to the practice of law. It was quite academic. It was really a mix of sort of legal philosophy, social studies, politics even really built in there. And I really quite enjoyed that. I then, having completed my degree, there's another decision point. And having enjoyed my degree, it was quite a natural thing to move on and seek out a legal career. And at that point in time, as I say, I was really looking for a job that could take me potentially overseas quite quickly. And law was a very obvious way to do that. Rather like Clifford Chance here, now in Sydney, the big firms in London, it was compulsory that as part of your training, you would go overseas. And so that was very attractive to me. And then rather like here again as well, once you've done your law degree, you do more your practical vocational training as a postgrad over there. So I did a 1-year postgrad, and then in your first 2 years, working, you do a lot of practical training as well. So that was really the nature of my legal training.
Do you mind explaining what exactly is private equity and mergers and acquisitions?
Sure. Let me start at a level above. So private equity and mergers and acquisitions are really subsets of what you would call corporate law. And corporate law can mean lots of different things. What we're talking about here is either companies or more likely investors buying and selling or investing in businesses. So that's what people talk about by mergers and acquisitions, really. That's really buying and selling businesses or interests in businesses. Private equity is a subset of that. Private equity is a type of business that buys and sells businesses as a profession. Their job, they normally have a fund of money which they take, and their job is to increase the value of that fund of money by buying businesses and then at a later point in time selling those businesses for more than they paid for them on the way in, and therefore creating a profit for their investors. So well-known private equity companies are people like KKR or Carlyle or Blackstone, big global well-known private equity companies. Within Australia, there's a very vibrant private equity community which plays a role in buying, investing in and growing Australian businesses, but ultimately they'll sell those businesses. So most private equity funds will only look to own a business for between 3 to 5 years, and then will sell that business. And the way they sell it is that you can list it on the stock exchange, you can sell it to another private equity fund, or you might sell it to a trade buyer. So that might be, you might sell it to Bunnings or Qantas or someone like that, somebody within the sector that owns that business. But at its core, M&A, mergers and acquisitions, private equity is acting for clients who buy and sell or invest in businesses.
So when people think about private equity and also mergers and acquisitions, what people normally think about is like investment banking and finance people. What is more of the legal challenges that people face when going to a private equity sale or a merger?
Sure. And those investment bankers are people that we work with on these transactions. They're part of the community. Our key role probably falls into three parts. We're really there for the duration of a transaction. There'll be a transaction that underlies the activity that we're involved in. And as part of that transaction, the obvious thing is we provide the legal advice and make sure that the transaction is legally sound and compliant with law. The second thing we will do is we will draft and negotiate the transaction documents for a transaction. And that can be very significant. So if you're acting for a private equity company buying a business, our role on the transaction documents, there'll be an agreement under which documents the acquisition of that business. But the piece of that contract dealing with the transfer of the shares or the assets is half a page. Those documents can go to hundreds of pages because there's lots of other commercial items or legal items to be dealt with, such as allocation of liability or any conditionality around the contract. Then the other piece of work we do is just generally around the broader project and the project management. What quite often happens on these transactions is you'll have the fund and the investment banker, they will have originated the deal. They will have gone and got the deal, priced the deal. They've done the financial analysis that underpins why it's a good deal and why it works. But when it comes to the implementation of the deal, that largely gets handed over to the law firm. So we're largely driving the implementation of the project. There's a lot of project management of people, documentation and process and bringing all that together. And that's why we end up with quite large teams, because we have a lot of stakeholders to interact with, and there's a large organisation piece. And depending on the nature of the transaction, there's often, you have lots of ancillary tasks gets thrown off in a transaction. So for example, we do a lot of due diligence activity, which is really an investigation of the business from a legal or contractual standpoint. That can require a considerable amount of work. There's often regulatory matters. You'll have seen foreign investment is a highly regulated area in Australia. The vast majority of our deals are cross-border, and so we do a lot of foreign investment work as well. So all the transactions are different. That's one of the things that keeps it interesting. But there's a number of common themes that run through them in terms of the work we do. Mm-hmm.
What is probably the most complex or most interesting deal that you've had to work with recently?
That's a good question. I'll talk about, there was one, a private equity fund, which was the acquisition of it's a consumer insurance business. And so the product itself, you look at that and think maybe that's not particularly exciting, if you like, but it's complex because you're in a regulated space. Anything that deals with financial services is difficult, is highly regulated. There's a lot of legal risk in terms of what you're buying. What made that particularly interesting is that the buyer, our client, was a large private equity fund. They were actually buying two businesses, which were essentially what had started out as almost family businesses that over 25 years had grown into very, very significant, substantial businesses. And which means that there's a certain nature of those businesses, which means you're dealing with very interesting people. And that's always an interesting dynamic if you're buying a family business, because those people really deeply care about the business that they're selling. And so while they're looking for a good financial deal, they're also looking to transition their business that they've built, it's been their life's work, into hands that they trust. And so that's always an interesting dynamic to observe, and is then very different than if you're just dealing with, say, a transaction from fund to fund. That transaction also involved, in terms of the way it was paid for, it was paid for in the consideration, as we call it, was structured in a very complex manner that involved some quite complicated debt financing into the transaction. So in other ones where it's, from our perspective, it involved both our corporate M&A expertise and our finance group expertise, and building the two together, and ultimately delivering the transaction for the client to the point where we had taken responsibility really for delivering something that was very complex, really important outcome to the client, that it got done, but within a certain timetable. And so that was quite a challenging transaction.
Is it often the case that you have to deal with very personal matters, such as in this case where it is their personal and also family-owned business? Is that
a key thing in the work we do? Is we deal with people, and we deal with individuals, and often we deal with people who either they might be selling a business in which they have a very significant financial and sometimes emotional stake, and with people buying businesses where they're spending a lot of money. So often we're dealing with our clients, we're dealing with them at some of the most stressful moments of their entire life. Now we do these deals every single day, so we see this every day, and therefore we become quite good at that. And so that's one of the challenges of the job, is often just managing the individuals and understanding what the inputs are to them and what's driving their thinking or their behaviour, and ultimately then taking that and driving an outcome that works for our client, and ultimately for everybody. And so the personal or the individual part of the deal is absolutely critical. As part of that, the reason our clients come to us is, again, it's personal relationship. People work with people who they trust, they rate their work, but also people they think they can work with. Generally, there has to be a relationship. I look at who my clients are. They're people who, they might not be my best friends, but they're friends. They're people with whom I have a very positive relationship. I know quite a lot about them. I know they know how to get the best out of me, and vice versa. And that's really the way M&A works. It's a very interpersonal type business, in terms of you're trying to achieve a goal that can be quite complex to do, both from a technical perspective, but also dealing with a number of people. So the interpersonal skill in the role of an M&A lawyer, I think, is one that people don't really talk about, but is pretty key. And it's an area where, when people join our team junior and they come through, it's an area you see people really improve and develop that skill the more experienced they become.
What would you say specifically are those types of interpersonal skills that you would need to be successful to be an M&A lawyer?
You need to be able to listen and identify what people's drivers are and understand what their true concerns are, because often what people say isn't quite what they mean, or isn't quite what they're thinking. And so you need to use the power of questions to really drill in and filter out what people want, if they're a client, or if there's a problem, filter down and understand what the real problem is. Because quite often, if you jump to a conclusion from something somebody tells you, you'll go and think you've fixed a problem. And when you go with the solution, they'll say, oh no, that's not what I meant. I actually meant this. And on the other hand, at times it's a matter of just it's showing humility and understanding in humanity, if you like, and just understanding. Quite often we see people in a very stressed state, and your job is to moderate that. Ultimately, everyone's trying to achieve an end goal. So if things become emotional or tense, often the best thing we can do is take the tension and the emotion out of that, and in an understanding way, and try to keep people focused on the end goal. But ultimately, you need to be able to observe what's going on around you and move things in a positive direction. And that comes with experience, if you like. I think one of the interesting things of the job that I know my family remark on is that I become, because they sometimes can hear, if I'm on conference calls at home, they can hear what's going on. And you become, hardened is the wrong word, you become very used to there being dispute around you, people being tense. And you just realise it's just a way of being. And so part of our job is just to help people in those situations. A lot of what we're really doing in our job is helping people, and we're helping them achieve an outcome. And if there's tension and emotion in getting to that, which there inevitably will be, that's just part and parcel of our job to manage that and deal with that in a constructive way that keeps things moving forward.
There are other more, I guess, conflict-based practice groups such as litigation and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Do you deal with a lot of disputes and conflict within your practice group as well?
We try not to. We try to avoid them as best we can. There are deals that, transactions that once they've closed and completed, disputes can arise, and then we involve our disputes team, whose job is dealing with genuine disputes. In our work, in order to, when we're looking to execute on a transaction, a sale or a purchase for somebody, there's disagreements along the way, but there's a distinction there between a dispute that ends up with our litigators. And so I have in my career of the transactions I've done, and I've done hundreds if not thousands of transactions, I've had 2 that have ended up in really serious disputes after the fact, and then those things move into the disputes team, and they do their job because they deal with people in genuine dispute, and whether that ends up in being settled, or it can end up in arbitration, or it could end up in the courts. But that's a very different skill set, yeah. And I let them stick to their speciality.
And I also think that's pretty much a hallmark of a good M&A lawyer, if you're both your clients and also the other side is also happy as well with the deal. So it is a magic circle firm. What is the kind of Sydney's relationship with Clifford Chance in England?
I look at that slightly differently, in that Clifford Chance is an incredibly integrated network. And so we have relationships with all of the offices. And in some respects, the offices is almost an artificial distinction because we work across global clients and we do that out of different offices, but we're often working on the same transactions and we're dealing with the same relationships. And so the office distinction becomes largely merged. We are dealing with people in other Clifford Chance offices all the time. For example, it's probably 10:30 at the moment. I've spoken to 2 people in Clifford Chance London today already, and 2 people in Clifford Chance Hong Kong today already, and I'll speak to other people as the day goes on. We're dealing with global clients, and we service them in a fairly seamless way across the network. So we don't really see ourselves necessarily as a network of separate offices. There's just places which people have a home office where they go to. So in particular, in Asia, and we operate, particularly in corporate and in finance, we operate Hong Kong, Singapore, Australia, almost as a merged business. And the best example of that I can give you is, so I've spent now post-COVID, all my time, but we used to do a lot more travel. But sitting and operating out of Sydney, in the last 2 years, I've worked on transactions for businesses in India, Vietnam, Malaysia, Thailand, and do a lot of work with China as well. And so in some respects in Clifford Chance, where you live is slightly secondary quite often to the kind of work you'll be doing. And what that means is it's highly collaborative and the relationship is seamless. I don't talk to somebody at Clifford Chance think, oh, you're based in London or New York or whatever. You're talking to just another person in the Clifford Chance network. It's very joined up.
That's awesome. And does that mean it's a lot more flexible as well if you do want to go to another office around the world?
Absolutely. The way we see it, particularly in Sydney, is we take people, some people come here out of the network, but we're always going to be a net feeder into the network because the other offices are much bigger than ours. And so we are pushing people all the time. People come through with us, they'll go off into the network, and we hope they come back. They may not. Clifford Chance throws up a lot of opportunities, and who knows, people have their careers. But if you take COVID out of the way, because there's obviously been a pause around that, but it's starting to happen again now, we have had people come work for us. Either they come in as grads and they do the training program and then spend some time and move on. We've had people come in more senior and spend some time and go. But in the 3 years I've been here, we've had people go to New York, we've had lots of people go to London. We're about to have somebody go to Italy. We've had some people go to France. We've had someone go to Dubai. And there's lots of people go to Hong Kong, Singapore, China. And essentially, if that's something you want to do, and we welcome people who do want to do it, then we very much encourage that, because the idea of Clifford Chance is that it's a group of enthusiastic, intelligent, capable people, and where there's great opportunity. And we really encourage people coming in, and we want people who want to come and work internationally. That's pretty key for us.
I've always been really interested in an international career as well, but something that I've always thought about because I'm interested in going to Hong Kong, Shanghai, stuff like that. Just as a last question, what is your favorite thing about Clifford Chance?
I have two. Can I say I've got two favorite things about Clifford Chance? The first is the opportunities it creates for no matter who you are in the organisation, and that's a result of two things. One is Clifford Chance is a truly global law firm. When you look at it, there aren't actually that many truly global law firms. There's lots of firms with pins in a map, but there aren't many that are genuinely in those locations doing top-level work in those locations in a way that's joined up, and with an international client base that covers from North America all the way across into across Europe into Southeast Asia. And what that means is Clifford Chance creates this amazing opportunities for no matter who you are, whether you're a lawyer or you work what we call business services, which are the services that support the legal group. If you have the right attitude and mindset and some ambition and energy, then this is a place to really grow in terms of your skill base, your knowledge, your professional network. And that's something I've really noticed since I've been here. And it just really does open up and make your professional life more interesting, and also where you might go in your professional life. And the second thing is the culture. Now, everybody talks about culture, but it's when I came into Clifford Chance, it's one of the things I really noticed about Clifford Chance. It guards its culture extremely tightly, and that is for good reason, because it has this highly positive, inclusive, productive culture. And it's hard to put your finger on why, but the closest I've got to put my finger on why is because it's full of really good people, and the personal attributes that those people have is that ultimately they're quite ambitious, they're highly intelligent, but ultimately they're quite caring and they're good people. They have they've got a good ethical, moral basis, and that plays out in the way the firm operates. It's highly inclusive. It's a force for good, and it doesn't tolerate bad behaviour within the business. And so one of the things I really notice is I observe things in the press which I suspect is really virtue signalling going on from other organisations. There's none of that here. We actually, and you see this day to day, that bad behaviour isn't tolerated, and the firm is always trying to improve. It's never just rests back and says we are the finished product. But if you look at the work that goes on around inclusion, around gender parity, LGBTQ type inclusion, and the whole general diversity inclusion initiatives and other initiatives in the firm, what they're really aimed at is trying to make sure that no matter who you are, when you come here, you feel like you belong, and also the firm will give you opportunity. And I think that's really positive.
Thank you so much again for joining us.
Thank you
so much, Mark.
No, pleasure. Thank you.
If you enjoyed this episode of InCites by UNSW Law Society, please subscribe to our podcast so you don't miss any future episodes.